Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a situation that is a living nightmare for anyone who has ever dealt with anxiety. Being trapped in a crowded, confined space when a panic attack hits. Imagine you are stuck in a packed subway car or a stalled elevator. The air feels thick, the crowd is pressing in, and suddenly your heart starts racing. Your breath gets shallow, and you feel like the walls are closing in on you. It's a terrifying experience, but it's also something millions of people face in silence every single day. In this video, we're going to walk through a powerful 10-chapter story that explores this exact moment. You'll see the sudden physical spiral, the silent battle to keep control in public, and most importantly, the exact grounding techniques and real-life tools used to break the cycle, find an anchor, and survive the storm. Whether you want to understand what a panic attack truly feels like, look for ways to manage your own anxiety in public spaces, or naturally build your advanced English vocabulary and idioms through a real, relatable human story, this episode is for you. Let's get right into Chapter 1.
The morning rush hour at the central station was always chaotic, but today felt exceptionally tight. Julian stood on the platform watching the sea of commuters press closer together as the digital sign announced another train delay. When the metal doors finally slid open, a wave of people surged forward from behind, carrying him directly into the center of the subway car. He found himself pinned between heavy winter coats, the air instantly turning warm, thick, and stagnant. As the doors closed with a heavy mechanical thud, the train plunged into the dark tunnel, and a familiar, unsettling tightness began to grip Julian's chest. He tried to shift his weight, but there was absolutely no room to move. Every square inch of the carriage was occupied by squeezed shoulders and blank faces staring into smartphones. Julian felt a sudden prickle of heat rise up his neck. He tried to tell himself that it was just a normal Monday morning commute, but his brain wasn't buying the reassurance. The lack of fresh air was becoming noticeable, and the low hum of the train tracks started to sound incredibly loud. He reached up to adjust his collar, trying to create some breathing room, but his hand felt heavy and clumsy. The space around him seemed to be actively shrinking, compressing his lungs before he could even take a proper breath. He looked toward the electronic map above the door, counting the stops left on his journey, but the glowing dots felt miles away. The train rattled violently as it sped deeper into the underground network, trapping Julian inside a moving pressure cooker. Two stops into the journey, the train suddenly screeched to an abrupt, violent halt mid-tunnel. The sudden braking threw Julian forward, forcing him to collide slightly with the stranger standing right next to him. The overhead lights flickered violently twice before shutting off completely, plunging the carriage into a terrifying, pitch-black silence. A second later, the dim emergency backup lights kicked on, casting eerie, pale shadows across the packed faces of the commuters. An automated announcement crackled to life over the intercom, muttering vague, distorted words about unexpected signal delays ahead. Julian felt a sudden, massive spike in his heart rate as the reality of the situation locked into place. His hands began to sweat profusely inside his jacket pockets, and the air inside the car instantly felt like it was running out of oxygen. He tried to take a deep, stabilizing breath, but his lungs stubbornly refused to expand fully against his chest. The terrifying internal voice of panic whispered that he was completely trapped deep underground with no way out. The silence inside the carriage was broken only by the sound of nervous whispers and the heavy sighs of frustrated passengers. He could feel his own pulse throbbing violently in his throat, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to drown out every other sound around him. He desperately wanted to claw his way toward the doors, but a solid wall of human bodies blocked every single path to safety. The temperature inside the stalled car continued to climb steadily, turning the confined space into an absolute furnace. A wave of cold, prickling dread washed over his shoulders as Julian realized the true battle was just beginning.
Every single sound inside the stalled subway car became overwhelmingly amplified to Julian's ears. The loud, tinny music leaking from a teenager's headphones nearby sounded like a rhythmic hammering directly inside his skull. The heavy, wet coughing of a man standing just to his left felt incredibly close and suffocating. Even the sharp rustle of plastic shopping bags and the clicking of phone screens seemed to echo aggressively in the confined space. The metal walls of the carriage appeared to be actively shrinking inward, creeping closer to him with every passing second. Julian looked around desperately, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for any possible escape route. There was absolutely nowhere to go. Only a dense, immovable wall of human bodies blocking the windows and the emergency doors. The trapped heat became entirely suffocating, wrapping around him like a heavy, wet blanket that cut off his air supply. A single drop of cold sweat broke free from his hairline and rolled slowly down the center of his spine. He felt completely disconnected from the people surrounding him, as if he were trapped inside a separate, terrifying dimension of fear. The ambient smells of damp coats, cheap perfumes, and stale coffee mixed together, making him feel intensely nauseous. He tried to look up at the ceiling ventilation grates, but they were completely still, offering no relief and no movement of air. The sensory overload was reaching a critical tipping point, battering his mind from every conceivable angle. Julian clamped his jaw shut tightly, desperately trying to hold back a rising urge to scream out for help. The symptoms escalated with terrifying speed, transitioning from intense discomfort to a full-blown physical assault on his body. Julian's heart hammered violently against his ribs like a wild bird desperately trying to break out of a cage. A wave of severe, rocking dizziness washed over him, making the solid metal floor feel like it was tilting dangerously beneath his feet. His vision began to blur rapidly at the very edges, narrowing down into a dark, terrifying tunnel that distorted his surroundings. He felt a strange, icy, prickling numbness creeping steadily into his fingers and moving up towards his wrists. The sensation spread down to his toes, making his legs feel completely hollow and incapable of supporting his weight. Julian became absolutely convinced that he was about to lose consciousness or stop breathing entirely right there on the dirty floor. A tight, choking knot formed in the center of his throat, making each tiny gasp for air feel like swallowing broken glass. His chest felt as though a massive, invisible weight was crushing down on it, compressing his ribs with immense pressure. He tried to swallow, but his mouth was completely dry, parched by the hot adrenaline rushing through his entire system. The physical sensations were so overwhelming that they entirely consumed his ability to think logically about his situation. He felt completely detached from his own physical body, watching his hands tremble violently from a strange, distant perspective. The panic was no longer just a feeling, it had completely taken over his nervous system like a violent electrical storm. Julian gripped the strap of his backpack with white knuckles, utterly terrified that his body was about to completely fail him. To the people standing mere inches away from him, Julian just looked like another tired commuter staring blankly ahead. On the inside, however, a catastrophic and exhausting war was raging through his entire mind and body. He fought with every ounce of strength he possessed to maintain his outer composure, absolutely terrified of drawing attention to himself. The thought of collapsing or causing a scene in front of a crowd of strangers felt just as dangerous as the panic attack itself. Julian slowly shifted his arm and gripped the vertical metal handrail so tightly that his knuckles turned completely white. He actively focused on the sharp, uncomfortable sensation of the cold metal cutting into his palm, using the physical pain to anchor his drifting mind. "Don't make a scene," he repeated to himself, like a desperate silent mantra over and over again in his head. "Just keep standing. Don't look crazy. Just breathe." He kept his head pinned straight ahead, terrified that looking at the crowd would cause him to completely lose his fragile grip on reality. His breathing was becoming audibly shallow, a series of short, frantic gasps that he tried to mask by clearing his throat. Every muscle in his shoulders and neck was locked completely rigid, braced against an invisible impact that never came. The internal effort to stay completely still while his nervous system screamed at him to run was physically agonizing. He was a prisoner of his own mind, locked in a desperate stalemate with fear in the middle of a crowded train. Julian closed his eyes for a brief second, praying that someone or anything would break the suffocating tension before he broke down. As Julian's breathing grew audibly shallow and ragged, a woman sitting directly in front of him noticed his distress. Instead of staring blindly or looking away in discomfort, she quietly stood up from her seat. She gently caught his eye through the crowd and gave him a small, understanding nod, gesturing toward the empty space. Julian hesitated for a split second, his mind racing with the fear that moving would cause him to collapse entirely. He forced his rigid muscles to unlock and carefully slid into the vacated seat, dropping his heavy backpack to the floor. Slipping into the seat provided an immediate wave of physical relief, removing him from the crushing weight of the standing crowd. He no longer had to fight the terrifying dizziness just to keep his balance on his trembling legs. The woman moved into the standing crowd, giving him a small pocket of physical space that felt like an absolute luxury. Though the storm in his mind was far from over, the immediate threat of falling down in front of everyone vanished. Julian rested his elbows on his knees and let his head drop slightly, shielding his face from the surrounding eyes. The simple act of human kindness acted as a temporary shield against the overwhelming sensory chaos of the carriage. He could still feel the adrenaline pulsing violently through his veins, but the absolute isolation of his panic had been broken. Someone had noticed his silent struggle, and that tiny connection gave him a fragile thread of safety to hold on to. Julian focused his eyes on the floor between his feet, preparing himself to face the next wave of the internal storm.
From her purse, the woman pulled out an unopened bottle of cold water and handed it to him without saying a word. Julian looked up briefly, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely grasp the smooth plastic. Instead of twisting the cap open immediately, he pressed the intensely cold sides of the bottle directly against his trembling wrists. The sudden, sharp shock of the freezing temperature acted like a literal circuit breaker for his overloaded brain. The icy sensation forced his mind to acknowledge something real, shifting his focus away from the phantom terrors in his chest. He slowly rolled the cold plastic over his palms and then pressed it firmly against the side of his overheated neck. A long, involuntary shudder rippled through his body as the cool temperature began to combat the suffocating heat of the carriage. Julian finally twisted the cap off, his fingers fumbling with the plastic ring before successfully breaking the seal. He took a tiny, deliberate sip, focusing entirely on the sensation of the crisp, cool liquid moving slowly down his throat. He chased the feeling of the water as it traveled down, actively forcing his attention away from the racing thoughts of impending doom. The physical symptoms were still screaming for his attention, but the cold water provided a tiny, solid foothold in reality. He held the bottle tightly against his chest with both hands, using it as a physical shield against the surrounding chaos. For the first time since the train had ground to a halt, Julian felt a tiny glimmer of control return to his hands.
With a small pocket of space now available to him in the seat, Julian began practicing a simple, structured breathing pattern. He slowly inhaled fresh air through his nose for 4 seconds, filling his lungs as much as the tight knot in his chest would allow. He held that breath inside his lungs for another 4 seconds, forcing his racing mind to count the numbers deliberately. Then he released the air through his mouth for a slow count of 4, imagining the toxic tension leaving his body with the breath. Finally, he paused for 4 seconds at the empty bottom of the exhale before starting the steady cycle all over again. Julian closed his eyes completely to shut out the overwhelming visual chaos of the packed subway car and the flickering lights. He focused every single ounce of his remaining mental energy on the steady rhythm of his counting and the solid feel of the seat beneath him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the aggressive, terrifying pounding in his chest began to decelerate into a more natural rhythm. The tight, suffocating band around his ribs relaxed just enough to let a genuinely deep breath of air slip into his body. The feeling of absolute impending disaster started to lose its sharpest edges, transforming from an active threat into a dull ache. His hands, still resting on the cold water bottle, stopped their violent trembling and settled into a minor, manageable quiver. He was actively retraining his hijacked nervous system, sending a clear message to his brain that he was not in immediate danger. The crowded train around him had not changed, but Julian's internal landscape was slowly shifting back towards solid ground. He kept counting, using the numbers as a sturdy anchor to hold himself steady against the receding waves of panic.
With a loud mechanical hiss and a sudden sharp jerk, the subway train finally started moving forward again. The low hum of the motor vibrated through the floorboards, a comforting sign that the stalled journey was resuming. A minute later, the dark tunnel walls gave way to a bright flash of light as the train pulled into the next station. As the heavy metal doors slid open, a massive rush of cool, fresh platform air flooded directly into the stuffy carriage. The dense crowd of passengers immediately began to disperse, moving out onto the platform and creating open space around Julian. The suffocating wall of human bodies dissolved in a matter of seconds, leaving a wide, clear path directly to the exit. Julian took a long, deep, completely unobstructed breath of the cool air, feeling it clear the lingering fog from his mind. The residual adrenaline began to slowly drain from his tightly locked muscles, leaving his body feeling incredibly heavy and exhausted. He slowly stood up from the seat, looping the straps of his heavy backpack over his shoulders with steady hands. His legs still felt slightly weak, like jelly, but they were entirely capable of supporting his weight once again. He stepped through the wide, heavy doors and out onto the open, spacious concrete platform, leaving the cramped train car behind. The intense, burning heat that had trapped him for the last 20 minutes dropped away, replaced by a refreshing breeze. Julian walked a few steps away from the train tracks, tracking the wide, high ceilings of the station with his eyes. He was completely out of the tight enclosure, out of the darkness, and back into a world where he could freely breathe.
Julian walked over to a metal bench on the open platform and sat down, letting his heavy backpack slide to the concrete floor. He rested his hands on his knees, watching the remaining tremors in his fingers slowly fade away to nothing. Across the platform, the subway doors closed with their usual mechanical thud, and the train pulled away into the dark tunnel. Julian watched it disappear, realizing that he had just survived the absolute worst of the storm in the most challenging environment possible. His body felt completely drained from the intense physical exertion of the panic attack, as if he had just run a grueling marathon. Every muscle in his neck and shoulders felt tender and sore from being locked tight against the terror for so long. Yet, amidst the deep physical exhaustion, a quiet, solid sense of pride began to root in his chest. He had not collapsed, he had not completely lost control, and he had managed to navigate the terrifying trap using his own internal tools. He picked up the water bottle the stranger had given him, taking one more long, appreciative sip of the cool liquid. He looked around at the open station, realizing that while he couldn't always control when anxiety would strike, he now knew he could survive it. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also proven to Julian that his mind possessed a deep, resilient strength. He stood up from the bench, took one final deep breath of the fresh platform air, and adjusted his backpack straps. He was tired, but the overwhelming fear was completely gone, replaced by a quiet confidence in his own ability to heal. Julian turned toward the exit stairs and began to walk up into the morning light, ready to face the rest of his day.
This brings us to the end of Julian's journey. It is a powerful reminder that even in the middle of a crowded room, deep underground, or stuck in a tight space, the storm will eventually pass. Panic attacks can make you feel completely helpless, but as Julian discovered, you carry the tools to ground yourself right inside your own mind and body. If this story resonated with you, or if you learned some new English vocabulary and idioms today, please give this video a thumbs up. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Have you ever experienced a moment of intense anxiety in a public place, and what techniques help you find your anchor? Thank you so much for watching. Keep practicing your English, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.